So my name's Jake. Welcome everyone to my informative speech about grading lumber. Might seem like a strange topic, but when I was growing up I was surrounded by carpenters. Did a lot of logging. My father was a carpenter for a truss building company. I'll never forget, he always would bring home firewood, scraps of lumber, and we had an old coffin cover. He didn't put dead bodies in it, he just put his scraps of wood in there for the fire, and there would always be tons of sawdust in the bottom, and it always seemed like Christmas in the summer. All this sawdust, me and my friends would always play in it and stuff. So I've always thought that lumber, the aspects of going out and cutting a log down, milling it down, grading it, and so that's what I'm going to talk about, is how lumber is graded and the two main types of lumber, softwoods and hardwoods. Hopefully after you guys leave today you might have a better idea of, if you ever go to do a home improvement project, you might have some insight on the right types of lumber to choose. Lumber grading is it's almost subjective, but they try to make it a science as much as possible. There's many aspects to grading the lumber, and they start with the defects of the lumber. The first type of defect is the splits of the, like if there's a board on end. A split is when the grain splits and separates. That can deter the grade from what an A would be, like a perfect board, no knots, no splits, nothing, to a level of B to C to D, and depending on how big the split is, ranks it in that grade. Also there's wanes, which is when a log is sent through a sawmill and is ripped down. Sometimes the boards, the cut pattern of the log being ripped actually exposes parts of the bark of the outer part of the tree, and so as you're to look at the board that's supposed to be square, there will be an edge of it that is curved, and it'll actually be, that's where the outer edge of the tree is, and that's where the bark was. Also there's knots, which are actually a part of the tree where a limb has grown off of the tree, and so when that tree is ripped down, it'll create a knot in the board. And depending on the size of knot is the judgment of what level it gets. Checks are basically just when the log is being sent through a sawmill and getting ripped down. There's machinery that grabs onto the boards and it'll leave check marks in it. And depending on the depth of the check is dependent on what grade it gets. And twists, there's a crown and a twist. A crown is if the board is laying on end and you're looking down it long ways, it'll actually bend upwards. And that's just natural after they cut it and dry it and everything, that it will take that strange shape. There's mechanical testing also, where they take a board, they have two fixed points, and they set it on those two fixed points, and pressure is put down on it. And at what point does that board actually snap in half is that the tension of that board. They don't do it to every board, of course, because then they would all be broken. But what they do is they take a sample out of each tree, each log, to judge that. And also there's the shear value. When a board is on end, you know, like take a regular 2x4, and when I say 2x4, it's 2 inches deep, 4 inches wide, and when it's stood on end, they take shear strength and put straight down on it, and when that board splits or busts apart, that is at what point. And it's also done, the knots, the shear strength, the tension strength, it's all done on percentages. So if a 2x4 breaks at 100 pounds and a 4x8, which is exactly twice that size in percentage, breaks at 350, you know that the 2x4 is less stronger But if it were to break at 200, they would both equal 100%. They would both be equal. The grading stamps that they actually put on the lumber, it'll have where it was made, what company actually did it. Most of my research and most of the lumber that I've dealt with is Western Wood Products. They handle pretty much all the milling services east or west of the Mississippi. And they have every company has their own specific stamp, but in each stamp it has to have the water content, the moisture content of the lumber itself. And then it also has the grade on it, which goes from grade A to grade D. And once there's a quick run over of what the grading criterias are for lumber, and every company's different and similar in little ways, but they're all really similar. Every company has to go by the same regulations. But there's two main categories to grading lumber. The first one is hardwood. It's a finer wood. It grows on deciduous trees, your leaf trees. It's usually a lot darker. It's not necessarily stronger, but it's more dense. They say it's not stronger because, Western Wood Products has designated that it's more brittle, similar to like glass seems strong, but it's really brittle. It doesn't take a lot to break it. But some examples of hardwood trees, mahogany, teak, walnut, oak, ash, poplar, aspen trees. Those are all really common trees that are cut down and used. And a lot of times they're used for, and this is what's called a select grade, where select is most important, the appearance is what's most important. This hardwood floor is definitely a select grade. I can't tell by looking at it what kind of tree it is exactly, but it's definitely came from a deciduous tree. Most hardwood flooring is either walnut or mahogany. The downside to hardwood is that it's very expensive, and it grows slowly. The trees grow slow, and so it costs money, and it's actually sold by the foot instead of lineal, where most other softwoods are sold, in 8-foot to 20-foot sticks. And that brings me to my next point of softwood, and it's more of this designated for structural framing, furniture. When they use softwood in furniture, it's when appearance isn't a big deal. They'll use it for like couches or some type of furniture that's going to be covered. One big difference in hardwood to softwood is softwood has very prominent rings. You can really see the rings in it, and that's because of the bark is really thick and really prominent in these trees. The softwood generally comes from coniferous trees, which are the needle-bearing trees, and they usually have a lighter color to them, but they are softer. The advantage to using softwood compared to hardwood is that it grows faster, and it's a lot cheaper. They sell it by up to 20 foot, and depending on how big they sell beams, depending on how big they get, it can get up to like 40, 50 feet long. The Western Wood Products Association and the U.S. Forest Service have designated a lot of these regulations for this lumber. The most interesting part I've found with trees and lumber is each board has its own personality. It's not like when you're working with metal, everything's gray, everything's silver. Every single stick, every board is different. It can tell you a different story. And basically that's what it's broke down to, is whether the grading rules are gonna designate if it goes to appearance, furniture, you know, trimming for windows, or if it's gonna go into structural framing on building houses. I just find it really interesting how different trees are, and you know, I've been a carpenter for 6 years now. My dad was a carpenter for 35 years, and I just find that the personality of the wood is really interesting.